No, thank you very much, Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. Now, Commander-in-Chief of the Economic Emancipation Movement. Part of the reasons why the progressive forces in 1917 pursued the great socialist October Revolution was because of the decisive and truthful, honest leadership of Vladimir Ulyanov Lenin, who said in 1905, after the first round of the revolution, in a perspective called No Falsehood, our strength lies in stating the truth. He said, we must speak the truth, therein lies our strength. And the masses, the people, the multitude will decide in actual practice, after the struggle, whether we've got that strength. And this was affirmed by another Marxist-Leninist, Amilcar Cabral, the great agricultural engineer from Guinea-Bissau, who said, hide nothing from the truth and nothing from the masses. Tell no lies, expose lies whenever they are told. Mark no difficulties, mistakes, failures. Claim no easy victories. That is the context within which we want to expose some of the issues that were being dealt with here. Now, the theme of the SONA address by the President was on dreams. Now, the synonyms of dreams are in the first category, illusions and hallucinations. And in the second category is imaginations and aspirations. We will determine in which category does this dream of the President fall in. Is it in the first category or in the second category? I'm a bit worried because when he announced the TOS team, which is going to be dealing with the private-public growth initiative, he mentioned the Van Zyl Slabet. You must go and check on YouTube. He said you are going to have a Van Zyl Slabet as part of that committee. Now, Van Zyl Slabet is dead. He died in 2010. He was part of the elite pact that got us to where we are now of economic servitude. So it looks like you draw inspiration even from white ancestors. I thought only the ones who are alive inspire you. You even mention them there. Wittingly or unwittingly, it's part of the issues that they define your character in terms of these issues. What are the truths that we have to deal with? Number one is that the National Development Plan is off the rail. If it was the illusionary train that you speak about, it is not a bullet train. It is actually a coal train. It is a coal train which is going in an opposite direction. One, the projections that all NDP aspirations are based on was that the economy must grow by an average of 5-6% annually up until 2020 and later on to 2030. None of that is happening. The economy is growing in the negative. You had said that you're going to create jobs. Actually, in terms of the objectives, in the current print of the NDP, is that unemployment next year, 2020, must be 14%. Next year, there won't be unemployment of 14%. It will be worse. It will be the 9.9 million people. Actually, it will be 10 million people who will be looking for jobs, are capable of working, and cannot find those jobs. That is what will be the realities of next year. So this NDP that you want to impose on us is off the rail. It's a coal train that is going on a different direction. And you still want to impose that as an agenda that must guide the whole of South Africa towards 2030. It is one of the things that we have to expose. So it's one of the things that we're dealing with. Fact number two is that the South Africa's debt to GDP ratio is approaching 60%. So the state collectively owes more than 3 trillion rands. One of the biggest expenditure items in the budget currently is debt services, more than 200 billion rands. Out of the resources, the little limited resources that we have to service the debt, and it is just paying the interests. We have an existing budget deficit, meaning that There are expenditure items that have been allocated for, but the money is not there, meaning that you must go back to the market to borrow the money. Maybe that is the reason why you cannot say boldly here that you are going to build a bullet train because there is no money to do so. You cannot say here that you are going to build a city because there is no money to do so. Now, Minister of Finance, if we were to make a thorough analysis of revenue growth from 1994 up until now, there is no foreseeable future that even in the next 20 years, if the revenue grows in the same pattern it has in the past 25 years, we will be able to deal with these dreams. Let's call them solutions that were given by the president. It will never happen. There is no plan in terms of how we're going to deal with the revenue growth. The revenue sources are shrinking because the economy is not growing. And jobs are being lost. It means that the number of people who contribute to the revenue is going to be declined. Now, what must be done? What is to be done? What must happen in terms of moving forward? I think you need to write faster now because we're going to give you the clearest perspective. One is that you must stabilize energy supply. And that is not going to happen through the unbundling of Eskom in the manner that has been conceptualized by Investec. That unbundling of chief restructuring officers is in an Investec document. Part of the contributors to the 400 million that was utilized for Nazareth conference. It comes from there. Go to the annual report of Investec, you will see chief restructuring officer unbundling shared 20,000 jobs in Eskom. And that is what we are supposed to be dealing with. You can't unbundle Eskom in the current crisis that it is experiencing. If there is any unbundling that should happen in Eskom, it should be to create a state-owned renewable energies, a company, state-owned renewable energy component of Eskom that is going to harvest the wind and the sun to create sustainable and renewable energy. That is number one. Number two should be to focus separately on the construction of a nuclear power station in a fiscally neutral way, Minister of Finance. You can have a build, operate, transform model that can be able to stabilize the energy supply from Eskom without affecting the fiscus in the manner in which is being proposed. What you need to do also is that we must industrialize South Africa, not in the form of the special economic zones that have been attempted currently. Collectively, we have got special economic zones in Kuha and Atlantis, in East London. One has been declared now in Mpumalanga, in Komati Port, and in Musina. I know there's an intention to declare another one in Tshwane. And there's one in OR Tambo. All of those special economic zones have not, for the past 25 years, created more than 10,000 jobs. Their contribution to the GDP is less than 1%. So if you continue in that model of special economic zones, you must know that you can't achieve anything. What is to be done? You have to pursue what Alice Amsden calls late industrialization. What are the components of those? One is that you must use borrowed technology. You can't invent now. Innovation happened with the first wave of industrialization. We can't innovate now. It happened with the second wave of industrialization. Now we must borrow technology. We must use state subsidies and protection of these industries. We must use the buying power of the state to drive local industrial expansion. The state in its entirety, all its entities, government, expends more than R1 trillion every year on procurement. And who is the ultimate beneficiary of that in buying the cars, the electronics, because all of them are made outside South Africa? It's the multinational corporations, which in turn are subsidized here in South Africa. We spend billions of rands giving to Mercedes-Benz, to Toyota, to BMW and all of those things without developing our own capacity to manufacture our own cars. We need to industrialize domestically and utilize the buying power of the state in order to make sure that we have got sustainable jobs in all the areas. So we must pursue what we call in the EFF elections manifesto, inward industrialization with export capacity. That is one thing that you have to look into. You made a commitment before that you want to create a sovereign wealth fund. You have not done so. A sovereign wealth fund has to be created so that even these FDI that you are chasing, when some of them come, you match rand per rand in terms of investments. That must happen here in South Africa. But in the current framework, this FDI is not going to help you with the developmental challenges that we're confronting in South Africa. Go and read development history, economic development history. Heterodox economics are writing that the person who's going to sweep on behalf of the ANC today won't understand what heterodox economics is. You will understand the context that in the history of economic development, there has never been an economy that is developed through FDI. That can be your priority number one. There has to be development of productive forces here in South Africa, and anyone who comes as a reaction to the economic development that is happening domestically. That is what you have to look into. Also, you must reconceptualize your understanding of a developmental state, because you always throw developmental state, and what we have in South Africa is not a developmental state. A developmental state is autonomous from capitalist influences. When the commander-in-chief says that this imaginary influence that we have on capital is not there, he's pointing to the fact that we are not running a developmental state. A developmental state must be autonomous from capitalist influences. It must be able to direct where investment happens, the content, the form, the pace of investments that happen. But you are not doing so. Instead, the capitalists are the ones who are telling you what to do. That is why the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act was withdrawn in order to allow Total to continue with the exploration in Mossel Bay. You are not in control. That is why NARSPAS is going to delist from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. The government employees pension fund exposure to NARSPAS is worth more than 250 billion rands. But they're going to delist from the JSE number one, and they're going to unemploy more than 2,000 workers. One, there is government exposure. You are not in charge. There is no developmental state that is happening under your watch, so we must not deal with that in the different form. Now, the founding manifesto of the EFF has got a pillar that speaks to the decentralization of development and building of new cities. We do not imagine it. We do not say as an imagination. We're not hallucinating about it. We're not illusionary about it. And we say that this has to be a concurrent effort in different areas. Massive investments in terms of allocation of resources, development of infant industries and protect them, domestically owned industries, and have all these cities developing in a manner that is going to deliberately depopulate Gauteng and Cape Town and Durban. Because in their current spatial framework, they cannot accommodate the number of people that they're having now. The infrastructure is going to be clogged, all of it in terms of sanitation and a variety of other things. 14 million people in Gauteng in the space that it has is not sustainable. How do you achieve a different perspective? We develop the areas where the people who stay in Gauteng are coming from. And that can happen only through a deliberate, decentralized development and building of other cities. Now, in the sixth parliament, the EFF, as the only socialist, Marxist, Leninist organization in South Africa, is going to table the following legislations. Number one will be the South African Reserve Bank Amendment Bill to make sure that we discontinue private ownership of the South African Reserve Bank, joining 90% of central banks in the world. Number two, we're going to then enact a bill on the creation of a sovereign wealth fund. Model it around the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, which in the current financial year has contributed an equivalent of 500 billion to the fiscus of Norway. We're going to retable a proper Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act to put clear conditions in terms of what should be the exposure of the state in terms of ownership of the new petroleum and mineral projects. We're going to table a clear anti-tax avoidance bill that is going to deal with the question of base erosion and illicit financial flows, because commitments have been made here that is going to be dealt with, and no one seems to be having the courage to come with a clear legislation to deal with base erosion. We're going to then finalize the process of having a state-owned bank. We're going to table a legislation on the insourcing of all government workers, because we need to detenderize the state. We must give it the capacity to take us forward, because we are the only organization that can provide leadership in this country. What is happening here, it's new objectives after new objectives. It's directionlessness. The ANC is defined by directionlessness. There's no clarity of what you seek to achieve. That is why you come and blow hot air here. And then a person who blows hot air is a clown from the NCOP, and then you give him a standing ovation. And that is what you achieve. And then you are even miseducating these children. I mean, like, well, the youth. A youth comes here and says that today we're marking the anniversary of the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter was adopted on the 26th of June, Nompendulo, Honorable. Not on the 20th, it was adopted on the 26th of June, 1955. And amongst other things, it says that the mineral wealth beneath the soil, the banks and monopoly industries shall be transferred to the ownership of the people as a whole. And that is the agenda that we must commonly pursue as the 6th Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Shivambu. The Honorable the Minister of Trade and Industry. Thank you, Honorable
The House
members.
is adjourned.
Thank you. You may continue, Minister.
Mr. President, House Chairperson and honorable members, fellow South Africans.
Hey, House Chairperson, we're going to start collecting tuition fees for this free education we're giving you. Yeah. 1,500 is the entrance cost now.
Can please sit down.
We can't keep educating you
Thank
every
you,
day.
Honorable Member.
Entrance
Can
fee.
you please sit down?